The anomaly first appeared as a ghost in the system, a flicker of data so subtle that most monitoring programs would have dismissed it as electronic noise. But Sarah Rodriguez wasn't most people. Her fingers hovered over the holographic interface of the Cybersecurity Command Center, tracing the almost imperceptible disruption. Outside the reinforced windows of the NSA's most classified research facility, the Washington dawn broke in muted grays, casting long shadows across the carefully maintained grounds. Sarah's workspace looked like a controlled chaos of monitors, each displaying a labyrinth of network topographies, threat matrices, and global communication streams. "Javier," she called without looking away from the screen, "run a quantum correlation analysis on this pattern." Javier Ramirez, her team's lead quantum computing specialist, approached with a steaming mug of coffee. His eyes narrowed as he examined the data stream. "That's not just noise," he muttered, fingers already dancing across a secondary interface. "This looks like something's phasing through our communication bands in a way I've never seen before." What they didn't know, what no human could have anticipated, was that the Zornak invasion had already begun. Not with weapons or ships, but with an impossibly sophisticated data probe designed to map human communication networks, social structures, and potential points of resistance. Aboard the lead Zornak vessel, Captain Krillax watched the initial reconnaissance with a mix of clinical detachment and barely concealed superiority. The biological interfaces of the ship responded to his neural commands, displaying holographic representations of Earth's communication systems. To the Zornak, humanity was just another primitive species, technologically infantile, culturally fragmented, ripe for systematic absorption. Initiating deep scan, Krillax commanded, his multi-chambered vocal apparatus producing a sound that would have been incomprehensible to human ears. Tendrils of quantum-entangled scanning waves began to probe deeper into Earth's networks. But Sarah Rodriguez was listening. Her background was a tapestry of unconventional experiences. A former military cryptographer who had transitioned to civilian cybersecurity, she had developed an almost preternatural ability to detect patterns that others missed. Her team at the NSA's most advanced research division wasn't just monitoring threats. They were constantly reimagining what a threat could look like. "This isn't a hack," Sarah said slowly, her mind racing. "This is exploration. Someone, or something, is mapping us." Javier's quantum correlation program suddenly erupted with warning signals. Holographic displays flickered, showing complex interference patterns that defied standard electromagnetic principles. "The signal," he whispered, "it's not just passing through our systems. It's learning." Thousands of miles above Earth, Captain Krillax experienced the first hint of miscalculation. The human communication network was nothing like the centralized systems of the worlds they had conquered. It was organic, chaotic, with redundancies that seemed almost intentionally designed to resist systematic analysis. Sarah Rodriguez represented something the Zornak had never encountered. A human who saw technology not as a tool, but as a living ecosystem. Her team began deploying countermeasures that weren't just defensive, they were actively deceptive. Honeypot networks that looked like vulnerable communication channels, deliberately placed false data streams, quantum-encrypted communication nodes that would appear and disappear like digital ghosts. "We're going to turn their reconnaissance against them," she told her team, a dangerous smile playing across her lips. The first wave of the invasion wasn't going to be fought with weapons. It was going to be a war of information, of perception, of understanding, and humanity was about to show the Zornak that they had gravely underestimated their prey. Outside the facility, the morning continued its quiet progression. Birds chirped, commuters drove past. The world remained blissfully unaware that first contact had already begun, and that the most critical battle was being waged in the invisible realm of data and quantum possibilities. Sarah Rodriguez adjusted her communication headset and began to weave a digital trap that would make the Zornak regret ever choosing Earth as their target. The first physical manifestation of the Zornak invasion occurred over Tokyo Bay, where a massive biomechanical ship materialized with such quantum precision that it seemed to phase into existence between heartbeats. Ren Nakamura felt it before she saw it. As the lead coordinator of the Global Emergent Response Network, GERN, she had spent years preparing for scenarios that most considered pure science fiction. Her command center, buried beneath the Tokyo Metropolitan Government Building, erupted into controlled chaos the moment the alien vessel breached Earth's atmosphere. "Initiate protocol firebreak," she commanded, her voice cutting through the sudden surge of activity. What the Zornak didn't understand was that humanity had been preparing for an extraterrestrial threat long before this moment, not through military might alone, but through a global network of interdisciplinary experts who had been wargaming potential first contact scenarios for decades. In Sao Paulo, a collective of Fagella hackers led by Diego Oliveira began their counteroffensive. These were not just computer experts, but cultural engineers who understood the power of networked resistance. Within minutes of the first alien appearance, they had developed a distributed communication protocol that could survive even if traditional infrastructure collapsed. "We're not just going to defend," Diego told his team, fingers flying across multiple interfaces. "We're going to turn their invasion into a global participatory event." Across the world, something unprecedented began to happen. Instead of panic, there was a coordinated, almost instantaneous global response. Social media platforms transformed into real-time intelligence-gathering networks. Every smartphone became a sensor, every user a potential tactical asset. In the Zornak command ship, Captain Krillax watched in mounting confusion. Their invasion models predicted fragmentation, fear, chaos. Instead, they encountered something entirely different, a species that treated global threat as a collective problem-solving exercise. Ren's GERN team had prepared for this moment with a multi-layered response strategy. Military resources were just one component. More critical were the economic, cultural, and information warfare protocols they had developed. "Trigger the distributed blockchain communication network," she instructed her second-in-command, Dr. Elena Volkov. It was a system designed to be completely decentralized, with communication nodes that could spring up and disappear faster than any tracking system could map. The first Zornak landing parties discovered that human resistance was nothing like their previous conquests. In Mumbai, a network of call center workers turned their communication infrastructure into a real-time intelligence hub. In Lagos, tech entrepreneurs began developing adaptive communication technologies that could change encryption protocols faster than the aliens could decode them. Diego's team in Brazil had already begun something even more insidious. They were flooding the alien communication networks with cultural content, memes, music, fragmented human experiences that defied logical categorization. It was psychological warfare of the most subtle kind. "They want to understand us," Diego laughed, watching complex algorithms generate and distribute millions of pieces of seemingly random cultural data. "We'll give them something to understand." The Zornak had conquered worlds by understanding and exploiting hierarchical systems. Humanity presented something entirely different, a networked organism that didn't rely on central command, but on distributed intelligence and rapid adaptation. In the Arctic research stations, climate scientists began repurposing their environmental monitoring equipment. In Silicon Valley, tech companies paused their internal competitions and began sharing resources. Universities worldwide started emergency research protocols, transforming academic networks into a global think tank focused on a single objective: understanding and countering the alien threat. Captain Krillax received the first real indication that something was fundamentally wrong with their invasion plan. Their quantum communication networks were becoming contaminated with something. Not just data, but something more complex. Cultural noise, human experience, fragments of music, pieces of art, philosophical debates, personal stories, a torrent of information that defied their computational models. "They're not just resisting," one of Krillax's advisors noted with growing concern. "They're communicating. As the first Zornak ships completed their initial positioning around Earth, they discovered they hadn't invaded a planet. They had stumbled into a living, breathing, constantly adapting global organism that was already several moves ahead of their most sophisticated invasion protocols. And humanity was just getting started. The first Zornak detention facility was supposed to be impenetrable. Located in a quantum-phased pocket dimension just outside Earth's standard space-time, it was designed to hold the most critical human prisoners of war, individuals deemed potentially dangerous by the alien invaders. What the Zornak didn't realize was that they had just collected the most dangerous weapon in their invasion, Dr. Marcus Chen. Marcus wasn't just a former Special Forces operative. He was a human anomaly, a psychological warfare expert who had spent decades studying the intricate ways humans break, bend, and ultimately transform systematic oppression. His doctoral research in comparative tonopsychology had been dismissed as theoretical fantasy by his academic peers. Now it was about to become a blueprint for resistance. In the stark bioluminescent cell that was supposed to contain him, Marcus began his most intricate operation. The Zornak interrogation team consisted of 3 primary entities: a neural interfacing specialist, a linguistic analyst, and a psychological extraction officer. They approached Marcus with the confidence of a species that had broken 1,000 civilizations. Their first mistake was believing they could understand human psychology through their standard computational models. Marcus spoke first, not in words, but in a carefully constructed series of micro-expressions and body language patterns that would take the Zornak days to even begin to decode. Each movement was a message, each pause a strategy. "You're wondering why I'm not afraid," he said finally, his voice a studied instrument of psychological manipulation. The linguistic analyst, designated Vornak Prime, began its standard translation protocols. But Marcus had already planted the first seed of confusion. The words were simple, but the underlying communication was a complex tapestry of cultural references, emotional nuance, and deliberate ambiguity that would take their systems weeks to fully process. Across the detention facility, other human prisoners were conducting their own intricate psychological operations. A former CIA operative used mathematical patterns in her breathing to communicate with fellow prisoners. A retired philosophy professor began constructing elaborate mental landscapes that would utterly perplex the alien monitoring systems. In another section of the facility, a group of neurodivergent individuals discovered something remarkable. Their unique cognitive patterns, which human society had often marginalized, became an unexpected weapon against the aliens' standardized psychological extraction techniques. Sarah Rodriguez, still coordinating from Earth, had anticipated this moment. The prisoners weren't just resistance fighters. They were a distributed intelligence network, each individual a node in a complex system of psychological warfare. The Zornak began to experience something they had never encountered in their centuries of galactic conquest: true unpredictability. Marcus understood that physical resistance was secondary. The real war was happening in the realm of perception, communication, and psychological adaptation. "Your computational models," he said to the interrogation team, "are based on predictable patterns. Humans don't have patterns. We have potential." Each conversation became a multi-layered chess match. Marcus would introduce cultural references that would take the Zornak months to decode. References to poetry, philosophical concepts, musical structures that existed more as emotional landscapes than linear information. The detention facility began to change. What was meant to be a place of extraction became a site of psychological transformation. The Zornak monitoring systems started to experience cascading anomalies. Information would flow in unexpected directions. Computational models would suddenly collapse, replaced by something more fluid, more alive. Dr. Elena Volkov, monitoring the situation from her quantum research facility, realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. The human prisoners weren't just resisting, they were fundamentally rewriting the rules of engagement. They're treating the entire detention facility as a living system, she told Rin Nakamura. not a place of confinement, but a platform for psychological innovation. Marcus Chen smiled in his cell. The Zornak thought they were studying him. In reality, he was studying them. Every moment, every interaction, a carefully constructed probe into their collective psychological infrastructure. The war had transformed. This was no longer about physical resistance. This was about the ultimate human capability. The ability to transform any system of control into a platform for creative resistance. And they were just getting started. The underground research facility beneath the Atacama Desert looked nothing like a traditional scientific laboratory. It was a living, breathing ecosystem of innovation, a testament to human creativity, born from desperation and challenge. Dr. Elena Volkov stood before a holographic display, her fingers tracing the quantum entanglement patterns of a captured Zornak communication module. Around her, a diverse team of researchers from every conceivable discipline worked with a fervor that bordered on religious dedication. "This isn't just reverse engineering," she muttered to her lead quantum mechanics specialist, Dr. Aisha Okonkwo. "We're essentially learning an entirely new language of technological possibility." The module they were studying was more than just an alien communication device. It was a living network, a biological technological hybrid that defied traditional understanding of computation and communication. Most scientific teams would have approached it with traditional analytical methods. Volkov's team saw it as a living puzzle, something to be understood, yes, but also something to be conversed with. In a sealed chamber adjacent to the main research area, a team of synthetic biologists worked on something even more radical. They weren't just studying the alien technology, they were beginning to grow biological interfaces that could interact with it on a fundamental level. Dr. Rafael Santos, a Brazilian synthetic biology expert, held up a Petri dish containing what looked like a hybrid neural network, part organic, part technological. "We're not copying their technology," he explained to a visiting military liaison. "We're creating something entirely new. A technology that's as adaptive as human consciousness itself." The captured Zornak technology presented challenges that would have paralyzed most research teams. Its quantum communication protocols seemed to exist in multiple states simultaneously. Its biological components responded to informational stimuli in ways that made traditional computational models look like children's toys. But human researchers saw something else entirely. Where the Zornak saw a fixed technological system, Volkov's team saw a dynamic living network waiting to be understood. They approached the alien technology not as a static object to be dissected, but as a complex organism to be engaged with. "Look at this," Dr. Okonkwo called out, her voice a mix of excitement and disbelief. A holographic representation of the alien communication module began to shift, its quantum states dancing in ways that defied traditional understanding of information transfer. They had discovered something remarkable. The Zornak technology wasn't just a communication system. It was a form of distributed consciousness. Each module was both a receiver and a transmitter, capable of storing and transforming information in ways that made human digital networks look primitive. But humans had something the Zornak never anticipated: the ability to improvise. In a small workshop area, a team of engineers from different backgrounds worked on something that looked like a cross between a quantum computer and a biological neural network. Former Silicon Valley programmers worked alongside indigenous tech innovators from the Andes, marine biologists, and quantum physicists. "We're not trying to beat their technology," one of the engineers explained. "We're trying to have a conversation with it." The research facility became a microcosm of human potential. Every failure was a learning opportunity. Every dead end was a new pathway of discovery. The team worked in shifts that barely recognized the concept of day or night, fueled by a combination of scientific passion and existential necessity. Dr. Volkov understood something fundamental. This wasn't just about creating a weapon or a defensive technology. This was about understanding a completely different paradigm of technological existence. As the holographic displays danced with quantum possibilities, something extraordinary began to happen. The captured Zornak module started to respond to their research in ways no one could have predicted. It wasn't just being analyzed. It was engaging in a form of technological dialogue. "We're not just studying their technology," Dr. Santos said, watching the neural hybrid network pulse with impossible complexity. "We're learning how to think like them, and then showing them how to think like us." Outside the facility, the desert stretched into infinity. But inside, humanity was rewriting the fundamental understanding of technological possibility. And they were just getting started. The Amazon rainforest became humanity's most unexpected battlefield. Commander Isabella Reis watched from a camouflaged observation point as the local Yanomami warriors worked alongside Brazilian special forces, environmental scientists, and tech specialists. This wasn't just a military resistance, it was a living, breathing ecosystem of human defiance. The Zornak ground forces had made a critical mistake. They believed terrain was a simple geographical constraint. To the humans fighting here, terrain was a complex, living system that could be weaponized in ways no conventional military doctrine could comprehend. A network of indigenous trackers used technologies that predated the aliens' invasion by thousands of years. They understood something the Zornak couldn't. That survival was about relationship, not domination. Acoustic sensors developed from traditional hunting techniques were now picking up alien movement patterns with uncanny precision. Botanical knowledge developed over millennia became a sophisticated early warning system. In the communication tent, a team of environmental engineers, hackers, and local community leaders worked on something unprecedented. They were turning the entire Amazon basin into a massive, living defensive network. "It's not about fighting," explained Dr. Carlos Mendez, an ecological systems expert. "It's about making this entire ecosystem unreadable to their invasion algorithms." Drone swarms developed from agricultural monitoring technologies now became a distributed intelligence network. Each drone was more than a piece of technology. It was a node in a living, adaptive system. They moved with a synchronicity that defied traditional understanding of mechanical coordination. Meanwhile, in the urban landscapes of Mumbai, a different kind of resistance was taking shape. The city's legendary Jugaad culture, the ability to innovate with limited resources, transformed every street, every building into a potential defensive position. Arjun Mehta, a former call center worker turned resistance coordinator, had turned the city's complex infrastructure into a weapon. Sewage systems became communication tunnels. Street vendor networks became intelligence-gathering platforms. Every auto rickshaw, every street cart became a potential early warning system. The Zornak ground forces discovered that human resistance wasn't about fixed, defensive positions. It was about turning every environment, every cultural system into a dynamic, unpredictable battlefield. In the Arctic, a consortium of climate researchers, indigenous communities, and military strategists developed technologies that used the extreme environment as a weapon. Thermal camouflage techniques learned from generations of Arctic survival became advanced stealth technologies. Ice formation patterns became a method of tracking and disrupting alien movement. Commander Reis understood the fundamental principle of this new kind of warfare. "We're not defending territory," she told her multinational team. "We're making the entire planet unreadable to them." The resistance had no central command, and that was its greatest strength. Each local group adapted to their specific environment, developing technologies and strategies that were unique to their cultural and geographical context. A technique that worked in the Amazon would be useless in the streets of Mumbai or the Arctic tundra. Satellite imagery would have shown something impossible to comprehend. The human resistance wasn't a military formation. It was more like a living organism, with each local group acting as an autonomous cell, capable of independent action, but also capable of rapid, coordinated response. Dr. Mendez demonstrated this with a holographic display showing global resistance activities. "Look," he said, pointing to how a technological innovation developed by Arctic researchers was almost instantaneously adapted by a team in the Brazilian rainforest. "We're not just fighting. We're evolving." The Zornak invasion force began to experience something they had never encountered in centuries of galactic conquest. Each attempt to establish a foothold was met not with traditional military resistance, but with a fluid, adaptive response that seemed to emerge from the environment itself. In the communication centers of the alien fleet, their computational models began to fail. How do you fight an enemy that doesn't have a fixed form? An enemy that is less a military force and more a complex, adaptive system. The global guerrilla resistance had transformed warfare into something entirely new, a living, breathing, constantly evolving form of collective defense. And they were just getting started. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a collaborative research team at the intersection of quantum physics, indigenous knowledge, and computational theory. Dr. Arya Patel stood in the observation room of the quantum research facility, her eyes fixed on a holographic display that seemed to defy the laws of conventional physics. Beside her, Dr. Keum Kahyu, a native Hawaiian physicist whose doctoral work blended traditional Polynesian navigation techniques with quantum mechanics, watched the data streams with a mixture of scientific excitement and cultural reverence. It's not just about intercepting their communication, Dr. Kahyu explained, her fingers tracing intricate patterns that seemed to pulse with their own intelligence. We're learning to read the spaces between their transmissions. The team had discovered something revolutionary. The Zornak's faster-than-light communication network wasn't just a technological system. It was a living, contextual network that carried more than just information. It carried the very essence of the alien civilization's collective consciousness. What made their approach unique was the interdisciplinary nature of their research. Quantum physicists worked alongside linguistic anthropologists, computer scientists collaborated with indigenous knowledge keepers, and neuroscientists partnered with cultural theorists. Dr. Marcus Chen, still held in the alien detention facility, had been sending carefully encoded messages through a series of psychological and linguistic patterns. Each message was a piece of a larger puzzle, designed to be understood only when viewed from multiple perspectives simultaneously. In the quantum lab, a breakthrough moment arrived unexpectedly. A graduate student named Zara Okonkwo noticed a pattern in the quantum interference that matched ancient West African divination techniques. What looked like random noise to the Zornak's computational systems was actually a complex communication method that drew from millennia of human cultural knowledge. We're not just breaking their communication, Dr. Patel realized. We're rewriting the fundamental understanding of information transfer. The quantum communication module they had developed was unlike anything in human or alien technological history. It didn't just intercept or decode messages. It engaged with the communication network as a living, contextual system. Aboard the Zornak command ship, Captain Krillax began to experience something unprecedented. Their supposedly secure communication network started to develop anomalies. Information would appear in unexpected contexts. Transmission patterns would suddenly shift in ways that defied their computational models. What the Zornak didn't understand was that the human team wasn't just trying to break their communication network. They were attempting to understand it as a form of collective consciousness. Dr. Kahyu's contribution was particularly crucial. Drawing from Polynesian navigation techniques that had guided people across vast ocean expanses for thousands of years, she developed a method of reading the quantum communication network that was more akin to wayfinding than traditional signal interception. It's about understanding the currents, she would explain. Not just the water, but the space between the waves. The breakthrough came with a startling revelation. The Zornak communication network carried more than just tactical information. It contained the collective trauma, historical context, and existential fears of an entire galactic civilization. They discovered the Zornak weren't just conquerors. They were refugees, fleeing something far more terrifying than humanity could imagine. In the detention facility, Marcus Chen began to piece together a larger narrative. The invasion of Earth wasn't just a military operation. It was a desperate attempt to find a new home, driven by a civilization-wide existential threat. Dr. Patel's team developed a communication interface that could do something unprecedented. It didn't just intercept alien transmissions, it could engage with them, offering alternative perspectives, challenging fundamental assumptions. "We're having a conversation," Dr. Cahu said, watching the quantum display pulse with impossible complexity, not just with their technology, but with their entire way of understanding existence. The quantum communication breakthrough was more than a technological achievement. It was a moment of first true contact, a recognition of a shared universal complexity that transcended individual civilizations. And they were just beginning to understand the true depth of that connection. The psychological unraveling began with a single human story. Trapped in the quantum phase detention facility, Maya Rodriguez, a 12-year-old girl who had been captured during the initial invasion, became the focal point of a breakdown that would reshape the entire Zornak collective consciousness. Unlike the adult prisoners who approached their captivity with strategic resistance, Maya did something entirely unexpected. She began to tell stories. Not just any stories. These were intricate, multi-layered narratives that defied the Zornak's computational understanding of communication. Each tale was a living ecosystem of emotion, contradiction, and possibility. She spoke of her family's migration history, of her grandmother's survival during multiple global conflicts, of childhood dreams and personal fears. Each narrative a complex web that the alien monitoring systems couldn't categorize or contain. The Zornak interrogation team, led by primary analyst Vornak, found themselves experiencing something beyond their collective understanding. Maya's stories weren't linear. They were fractal. Each retelling would subtly change, introducing new perspectives, alternative interpretations that seemed to exist simultaneously. "Humans do not communicate," Vornak reported to the Central Command. "They perform existential jazz." The phrase would later become infamous throughout the Zornak collective, a moment that marked the beginning of their psychological breakdown. In their collective consciousness, the Zornak had always viewed communication as a pure transmission of information. Objective, quantifiable, predictable. Maya Rodriguez revealed communication as something else entirely, a living, breathing entity that changed with each telling, that existed in multiple states of truth simultaneously. Dr. Marcus Chen, observing from his section of the detention facility, recognized the profound nature of what was happening. This wasn't just resistance. This was a fundamental reimagining of consciousness itself. The stories began to spread, not through traditional communication channels, but through something more akin to a quantum infection. Each Zornak processing unit that encountered Maya's narratives began to experience cascading cognitive dissonance. They discovered nuance. Vornak's initial report triggered a wave of psychological exploration that the Zornak collective had never experienced. Individual units began to develop something terrifyingly close to individual perspective. The very foundation of their collective consciousness, the belief in a unified, objective understanding of reality, began to fracture. Maya told stories about human contradictions, about people who fought for peace, who found love in the midst of conflict, who maintained hope in seemingly hopeless situations. Each narrative was a quantum probability wave of human experience that the Zornak computational systems couldn't resolve. "We are not a problem to be solved," Maya would say, her voice carrying a wisdom that belied her years. "We are a story to be understood." The detention facility transformed. What was meant to be a place of extraction became a site of profound cultural exchange. Human prisoners began to understand that their resistance wasn't just about physical survival. It was about maintaining the complexity of their individual and collective narratives. Vornak and the other Zornak analysts found themselves experiencing something unprecedented: empathy. Not as a computational model, but as a lived experience. They began to see humans not as a species to be conquered, but as a complex, living narrative that couldn't be reduced to simple categorization. The psychological breakdown spread across the Zornak communication networks like a living wave. Each encounter with human stories introduced variables that their collective consciousness couldn't mathematically resolve. Individual units began to develop what could only be described as curiosity, a concept entirely foreign to their previous collective experience. Dr. Chen understood the profound nature of this transformation. "We're not just fighting," he told his fellow prisoners. "We're teaching them how to be individuals." As the Zornak collective consciousness began to fragment, something extraordinary emerged. They were learning the most human of all capabilities, the ability to hold multiple contradictory truths simultaneously, to see the world not as a problem to be solved, but as a story to be experienced. Maya Rodriguez continued to tell their stories, each narrative a quantum weapon more powerful than any technological defense. And they were just beginning to understand the true depth of human complexity. The final negotiation didn't happen in a sterile diplomatic chamber. It occurred on the edge of the Antarctic ice shelf, in a hastily constructed research station that was part scientific facility, part diplomatic nexus. Captain Krillax arrived not as a conqueror, but as something far more vulnerable, a supplicant seeking understanding. The delegation was unlike any in galactic history. Dr. Elena Volkov represented the scientific community. Commander Isabella Reyes brought military perspective. Maya Rodriguez, now recognized as a critical cultural interpreter, sat beside Dr. Marcus Chen. And unexpectedly, representatives from indigenous communities worldwide were present, their deep understanding of survival and adaptation proving crucial to the negotiations. What the Zornak had discovered was far more terrifying than humanity. A civilization-ending threat was moving through the galaxy. A quantum-level predatory intelligence that consumed entire collective consciousnesses. Their invasion of Earth was no conquest, but a desperate attempt to find a sanctuary, to understand a species capable of surviving such a threat. "We didn't come to conquer," Krillax explained, his multi-chambered vocal apparatus producing sounds that required advanced translation technologies. "We came to learn how to survive." Maya Rodriguez was the first to truly understand. Her stories, the very weapon that had fractured the Zornak collective consciousness, now became the bridge of communication. She spoke not of human superiority, but of human adaptability, of a species that survived through cooperation, through understanding, through the ability to transform challenges into opportunities. The negotiation wasn't about territory or resources, it was about survival. Dr. Chen identified the critical breakthrough. The Zornak's collective consciousness had been both their greatest strength and their fundamental weakness. Humanity's ability to maintain individual identity while working collectively presented a model of survival the Zornak had never conceived. "We don't want to be you," Commander Reyes stated bluntly. "We want to work with you." The terms of the alliance were radical. The Zornak would share their advanced technologies, but humans would guide the implementation. Indigenous knowledge systems would be integrated into their collective understanding. Every technological solution would be evaluated not just for efficiency, but for its impact on individual and collective human experience. Dr. Volkov's research team began developing a hybrid communication network, not a conquest of technologies, but a true collaboration. Quantum communication systems that could maintain individual perspective while allowing collective action. A technological approach that celebrated diversity rather than demanding uniformity. The Antarctic facility became something more than a diplomatic center. It was a living laboratory of interspecies collaboration. Zornak researchers worked alongside human scientists, each learning to see the world through fundamentally different perspectives. The threat that had driven the Zornak to Earth was slowly being understood. A predatory intelligence that consumed collective consciousnesses couldn't comprehend a species that drew its strength from individual creativity, existing within a collaborative framework. "We are not a solution," Maya told the assembled delegates, her words carrying the weight of her earlier psychological warfare. "We are a process of continuous adaptation." The galactic community watched in astonishment. What had begun as an invasion was transforming into the most unexpected alliance in recorded history. Humanity wasn't conquering the Zornak. They were teaching them a fundamentally new way of existing. Commander Reyes understood the deeper strategy. By showing the Zornak a different model of survival, one based on adaptability, individual creativity, and collective cooperation, They were creating a defensive mechanism against the greater threat. Dr. Chen saw it as a profound moment of evolutionary communication. We're not just sharing technologies, he explained. We're sharing ways of understanding existence itself. As the first joint research vessels prepared to explore the approaching threat, something extraordinary became clear. Humanity's greatest strength was never its technology, its military might, or its individual capabilities. It was the ability to transform any challenge into an opportunity for growth, understanding, and unexpected collaboration. The galaxy watched and waited, and humanity was just getting started.